Please don't go. Not again. I can't lose you again." Grace Montgomery's trembling voice cut through the silence of the opulent dining room as she reached desperately for the young woman backing toward the door. "You didn't lose me the first time," Nora replied, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation. But this changes everything." James stepped forward, his voice breaking with emotion. "I don't care about blood or DNA or any of it. What I feel for you doesn't change because of some revelation about the past." "It has to change," Nora whispered, her heart shattering. "Don't you understand? We can't be together now. We can never be together." Grace's voice rose with fierce determination. "Yes, you can. You can and you will, if that's what makes you happy. I gave you away once because I was young and scared. I won't make that mistake again. Welcome back to Sir Gentle Stories, where we explore the depths of the human heart and discover that sometimes the most extraordinary tales are hidden in the most ordinary moments. To my incredible subscribers who continue this journey with me, thank you for being part of our storytelling family. Your support, your comments, and your shared experiences make every story we tell together more meaningful. Before we dive into today's remarkable tale, let me offer prayer for each of you watching. May you find strength in times of uncertainty, courage when facing difficult decisions, and peace in knowing that every ending can become a new beginning. May your hearts remain open for forgiveness, your minds clear for wisdom, and your spirits brave enough to choose love even when the world tells you otherwise. And may you always remember that you are worthy of the love you seek and the happiness you deserve. Amen. Now, if you're new to our channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button because today's story will challenge everything you think you know about family, love, and second chances. And to those already part of our family, you know the drill. Grab your favorite drink, settle in, and prepare for a story that will stay with you long after the final word. The story begins. The Montgomery estate had always been a fortress of perfection. Every piece of crystal gleamed under chandelier light. Every surface polished to mirror shine. Every flower arrangement precisely placed to project an image of untouchable elegance. But on this particular evening, as autumn rain drummed against the floor-to-ceiling windows, perfection was about to shatter like glass against stone. Grace Montgomery adjusted her pearl necklace for the third time, her emerald eyes scanning the formal dining room with practiced precision. Everything had to be perfect for tonight. James was bringing home someone special, someone he claimed had changed his life. "Nervous, darling?" Richard Montgomery's voice carried its usual undertone of authority as he straightened his silk tie. 25 years of marriage had taught him to read his wife's subtle tells, and Grace was practically vibrating with anxiety. "Not nervous," Grace replied, smoothing an invisible wrinkle from the Italian tablecloth. "Just curious. James has never brought anyone home before. Not like this." Richard poured himself 2 fingers of scotch from the crystal decanter. "He's 32, Grace. It was bound to happen eventually. Though I do hope this woman understands what she's walking into." Grace's laugh held no humor. "What do you mean?" "I mean our son is heir to a billion-dollar empire. Women see dollar signs before they see the man. I've had my security team run a preliminary background check." "You did what?" Grace whirled around, her voice sharp with disapproval. "Standard precaution. Her name is Nora Hayes. 28 years old. Works as a server at some downtown diner. Grew up in foster care. No family connections we can trace. Clean record, but..." Richard paused, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Let's just say she's not exactly what we envisioned for James." Before Grace could respond, the sound of car doors slamming echoed from the circular driveway. Her breath caught as headlights swept across the rain-slick windows. "They're here," she whispered, her hand instinctively moving to her throat where a delicate chain used to rest, a chain she removed 30 years ago and never worn again. The massive oak doors opened, and James Montgomery stepped into marble foyer, rain droplets clinging to his dark coat. Behind him, almost hesitant, came a young woman who seemed to glow despite her simple attire. Nora Hayes was beautiful in a way that couldn't be bought or manufactured. Her chestnut hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, and her hazel eyes held a warmth that seemed to light the room from within. She wore a simple black dress, clearly borrowed, Grace noted with a mother's eye, and carried herself with quiet dignity despite the obvious intimidation of her surroundings. But it wasn't Nora's beauty that stopped Grace's heart. It wasn't the way James looked at her with such tender pride, or the way she unconsciously reached for his hand when the opulence of Foyer seemed to overwhelm her. It was her face. The delicate bone structure, the gentle curve of her lips, the way her left eyebrow arched just slightly higher than her right when she was nervous. Features that belonged to another time, another life, another love that Grace had buried so deep she convinced herself it never existed. Mother, father, James said, his voice warm with excitement. I'd like you to meet Nora Hayes. Nora, these are my parents, Richard and Grace Montgomery. Grace opened her mouth to speak, to offer the polite greeting she'd rehearsed, but no sound came. Her wine glass, when had she picked up a wine glass, began to tremble in her grip. Nora stepped forward with the natural grace of someone accustomed to reading people's needs, her server instincts kicking in. Mr. and Mrs. Montgomery, it's such an honor to meet you. James has told me so much about. The wine glass slipped from Grace's fingers, crimson liquid spreading across the pristine white tablecloth like spilled secrets. The crystal shattered against the marble floor, the sound echoing to the dining room like a gunshot. Grace. Richard's voice seemed to come from underwater as Grace's chair scraped against the floor, her hand flying to her chest. Darling, what's wrong? But Grace couldn't hear him. She couldn't hear anything over the roaring in her ears, the thundering of her heart, the whisper of a name she hadn't spoken in 30 years. Daniel. Nora moved instinctively toward her, genuine concern replacing social nervousness. Mrs. Montgomery, are you all right? Should I call someone? The voice. Dear God. Even her voice carried echoes of him. The same gentle cadence, the same unconscious melody that had once whispered promises of forever in moonlit gardens. Grace's world tilted dangerously. She was 19 again, bare feet, dancing across dew-covered grass, laughing at jokes that weren't funny but felt like poetry because they came from his lips. She was holding his calloused hands and promising that nothing, not family, not money, not the weight of expectations, would ever tear them apart. How young they'd been. How impossibly, beautifully naive. No, Grace whispered, her voice barely audible. This can't be happening. James frowned, confusion creasing his handsome features as he moved protectively closer to Nora. Mother, what's wrong? You're scaring her. But Grace's emerald eyes remained locked on Nora's face, memorizing every line, every shadow, every heartbreaking similarity to the man who had owned her soul before duty claimed her body. Where? Grace's voice cracked like autumn leaves. Where did you find her? The question hung in the suddenly thick air like an accusation. Even the antique grandfather clock in the corner seemed to pause its steady rhythm, waiting for an answer that would change everything. The silence that followed Grace's question was suffocating. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across walls lined with family portraits. Generations of Montgomerys watching like silent judges as their carefully ordered world began to crack. James looked between his mother's ashen face and his father's calculating stare, confusion evident in every line of his body. We met at St. Catherine's Children's Home, he said slowly, as if speaking to someone who might not understand. Nora volunteers there 3 times a week, teaching art to kids. Art, Grace repeated, the word barely a whisper. She's incredible with them, James continued, his voice warming with pride despite the tension crackling through the room. These children who've been through so much trauma, and she gets them to open up, to express themselves. Last month, she organized an art show where they could display their work. You should have seen their faces. That's enough, Richard interrupted sharply, his lawyer's instincts kicking in as he studied Nora with new intensity. Something about his wife's reaction had triggered every alarm bell in his head. Miss Hayes, perhaps you could tell us more about yourself, your family background, your education. Nora shifted uncomfortably, her hand instinctively rising to touch the delicate silver locket at her throat. Well, there's not much to tell. I grew up in foster care here in the city. Grace's breath hitched audibly, her emerald eyes fixated on the movement of Nora's fingers against the necklace, Recognition dawning like a horrible sunrise. Foster care, Richard repeated, his tone neutral but his eyes sharp. And your parents? I never knew them. Nora's voice carried quiet strength, the dignity of someone who'd learned early that shame only had the power you gave it. I was found as a baby at Presbyterian Hospital. Someone left me in the nursery with just this locket and a note. The antique grandfather clock seemed to tick louder in the sudden stillness. Grace gripped the edge of the dining table, so hard her knuckles went white. A note? James asked gently, seeing how the questioning was affecting both his girlfriend and his mother. You never told me about a note. Nora's cheeks flushed pink. It's not exactly first date conversation. The social worker who handled my case told me what it said when I turned 18. It was personal. Personal how? Richard pressed, ignoring his son's warning look. Grace found her voice, though it came out strained and hollow. What did the note say? There was something in Grace's tone, a desperate hunger that made Nora take an unconscious step backward. She glanced at James, who nodded encouragingly. It said, "Her name is Nora, and she is loved beyond measure. Please give her the life I cannot." The words hung in the air like a prayer and a lament all at once. Grace's composure finally shattered. A sound somewhere between a sob and a gasp tore from her throat as she pushed back from the table, her chair scraping against marble like fingernails on a chalkboard. Grace. Richard moved toward his wife, but she waved him off, her eyes never leaving Nora's face. "The locket," Grace whispered, her voice breaking. May I see it?" Nora hesitated, clearly overwhelmed by the emotion radiating from this elegant woman she'd only just met. But something in Grace's eyes, a raw vulnerability that transcended social boundaries, made her nod. With trembling fingers, Grace worked the delicate clasp of the silver locket. It opened with a soft click that seemed to echo through the cavernous dining room. Inside, nestled against faded velvet, were two tiny photographs. One showed a young woman with Grace's exact bone structure, her hair styled in the fashion of 30 years past. The other showed a dark-haired man with kind eyes and a gentle smile, eyes that looked back at them from Nora's own face. The locket slipped from Grace's nerveless fingers, clattering against the marble floor. "That's impossible," Richard breathed, moving closer to peer the photographs. "Grace, that's you. But how?" "Because I put it there," Grace said, her voice barely audible. 30 years ago, when I placed you in that hospital bassinet and walked away from the biggest mistake of my life." The words detonated like a bomb in the elegant dining room. James staggered backward as if physically struck, his face draining of all color. "What did you just say?" he whispered. Grace rose from her chair like a woman, ascending a scaffold, every movement deliberate and heavy with the weight of buried secrets. "I said that Nora is my daughter. The daughter I gave away because I was 19 and terrified and thought I was protecting everyone." Nora's knees buckled. She would have fallen if James hadn't caught her instinctively, his strong arms wrapping around her waist even as his world crumbled around them both. "You're saying she's my sister?" James's voice cracked on the words. "Half-sister," Grace corrected, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Different fathers." Richard's face had gone purple with rage and betrayal. "Different fathers," he repeated slowly, dangerously. "Are you telling me you bore another man's child before our marriage and never thought to mention it?" Grace flinched but stood her ground. "I was 18 when our fathers arranged our engagement, Richard. 18 and in love with someone else." "In love," Richard spat. "With whom?" Grace's eyes found Nora's again, seeing not just the young woman before her, but the ghost of the man who had given her the only authentic joy she'd ever known. "His name was Daniel Morrison," she said quietly. "He worked construction during the day and went to law school at night. My parents thought he was beneath us, but I would have given up everything for him." "Would have," Richard noted coldly. "But you didn't." Grace's laugh was bitter as winter wind. "No, I didn't. Because my father found out about us, about the pregnancy. He gave me a choice. Marry you immediately and give up the baby quietly, or be disowned and watch Daniel's construction company lose every contract it had. My father was very thorough in his threats. Nora pulled away from James's embrace, unable to bear the comfort his touch provided, when every nerve in her body screamed that it was wrong now, all wrong. "So you chose," she said, her voice hollow with understanding. "You chose your family's money over your own child. I chose what I thought was survival," Grace said desperately. "For all of us. I thought you'd be adopted by a loving family. I thought Daniel would move on and build the life he deserved. I thought—" "You thought wrong," Nora interrupted, her composure finally cracking. "Do you have any idea what foster care is like? Being shuffled from home to home, never belonging anywhere, always wondering why your own mother didn't want you." The anguish in her voice cut through Grace like a blade. "I did want you," she whispered. "I wanted you so much it nearly killed me to let you go. But you did let me go," Nora said, tears spilling over. "And now—" She looked at James, memorizing every line of his face, every feature she'd fallen in love with. "Now we can never be together." If you're finding this story as gripping as I am, make sure to hit that like button and let me know in the comments. What would you do if you discovered the person you loved was actually your sibling? These are the impossible situations that test the very foundation of what we believe about love and family. The revelation had been made, but the true test of the Montgomery family was just beginning. The silence that followed Nora's words was deafening. In the span of 30 minutes, the Montgomery family's carefully constructed world had collapsed, leaving them all standing in the rubble of secrets and shattered expectations. James ran both hands through his hair, his face a massive anguish. "This is insane. How are we supposed to just walk away from each other? How are we supposed to pretend we don't feel what we feel? Because it's what decent people do," Richard said coldly, pouring himself another scotch with hands that trembled slightly. "Because some lines cannot be crossed, no matter what the heart wants." Grace stood frozen between her husband's moral certainty and her children's pain, watching the two people she loved most in the world suffer because of choices she made 30 years ago. "Richard," she said quietly, "they didn't know. They fell in love as strangers. They can't be blamed for something that happened before either of them was born into this knowledge. Can't they?" Richard whirled on his wife, years of controlled emotion finally erupting. "You built our entire marriage on a lie, Grace. You let me believe James was our firstborn when you'd already had a daughter you abandoned like garbage." The word garbage hit the room like a physical blow. Nora stepped forward, her voice carrying a strength that surprised everyone present. "I wasn't garbage," she said firmly. "I was a child born from love, even if that love was complicated. And I wasn't abandoned. I was placed with hope for a better future." She turned to Grace, her eyes glistening but clear. "Did you think about me? Over the years, did you wonder?" Grace's composure crumbled completely. "Every single day," she whispered. "Every birthday, every Christmas, every moment of happiness with James. I wondered where you were, if you were safe, if you were loved. I drove past that children's home so many times, hoping for just a glimpse of you. Then why didn't you come for me?" The question came out broken, the plea of a child who'd spent a lifetime wondering why she wasn't worth staying for. "Because I was a coward," Grace said simply. "Because I'd built this perfect life on top of burying you, and I was terrified that digging up the truth would destroy everything. I convinced myself you were better off without me." Nora studied Grace's tear-streaked face, seeing not the polished socialite, but a broken woman who'd been carrying an impossible weight for 3 decades. "Maybe I was better off," she said quietly. "Foster care taught me resilience, taught me to value people for who they are rather than what they have. It taught me that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up for you when life gets hard." James moved toward her instinctively. "Nora—" "No," she said, holding up a hand to stop him. "Let me finish. What I feel for you doesn't change because of some genetic connection we knew nothing about. But what we do with those feelings, that's what defines who we are." Richard's face was granite. "So you're saying you'll continue this relationship?" Before Nora could answer, Grace stepped forward with sudden fierce determination. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger than had been all evening. "If they choose to, yes." The room erupted in shock. "Have you lost your mind?" Richard demanded. Grace turned to face her husband, and for the first time in 25 years of marriage, she looked at him not as a wife seeking approval, but as an equal demanding respect. "I lost my mind 30 years ago when I let fear make my choices for me," she said. "I gave away my daughter once to protect the family reputation. I will not make that mistake again." She moved to stand between James and Nora, placing protective hand on each of their shoulders. "Look at them, Richard. Really look at them. They found each other across a city of millions. They fell in love, not knowing their connection. If that's not fate, if that's not the universe trying to heal what I broke, then I don't know what is." "It's biology," Richard said coldly. "Genetic attraction. It happens in families separated at birth." "It's love," Grace interrupted. "Pure and simple. The kind of love I had with Daniel before the world convinced me it was wrong. The kind of love that transcends every boundary society tries to impose." James stared at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. "You're serious. You're actually supporting this." Grace nodded, tears flowing freely. "I spent 30 years living a half-life because I was too afraid to fight for what mattered. I won't watch you do the same." Nora's voice was barely a whisper. "But what will people say? The scandal." "Let them talk," Grace said fiercely. "Let them whisper and judge and point fingers. Their opinions never fed a hungry child or comforted a broken heart. Love did that. Choice did that." Richard set down his glass with deliberate precision. "If you support this madness, Grace, you do it without me. I will not be part of a family that condones." "Then go," Grace said simply. "Go if you must. But know this. I am done choosing reputation over truth, done choosing appearances over authenticity. I am done living in fear of what other people think." She turned back to James and Nora, her voice gentle but unwavering. "The choice is yours. Whatever you decide, you'll have my support. I owe you both that much." James reached for Nora's hand, his eyes searching her face. "I know it's complicated. I know it's unconventional. But I also know that losing you would be like losing half my soul." Nora looked down at their intertwined fingers, then up at Grace's hopeful face, then into James's eyes that held the same warmth and determination she'd fallen in love with. "It won't be easy," she said finally. "People will judge us. They'll make assumptions." "Let them," James said softly. "We know the truth. We know what we mean to each other." Grace smiled through her tears, a radiant expression of hope and redemption. Then it settled. As the three of them stood together in the chandelier-lit dining room, Richard Montgomery walked out without another word, leaving behind a family forever changed but finally authentically whole. 6 months later, Grace stood in the rose garden where she'd once promised her heart to Daniel Morrison. Beside her, Nora knelt among the flowers, showing a group of foster children how to plant seeds that would bloom long after they'd returned to their temporary homes. "Miss Nora," a small voice piped up, "how do you know they'll grow?" Nora smiled, brushing soil from her hands. "Because gardens teach us that beautiful things can grow in the most unexpected places, Tommy. Sometimes the strongest roots come from the hardest ground." From the terrace, James watched his mother and the woman he loved working together, their heads bent over tiny seedlings that held the promise of tomorrow. Grace had been right about one thing. Love, true love, transcends every boundary. And sometimes the most beautiful stories are the ones that dare to rewrite all the rules. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to hear about the power of second chances and authentic love. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we have more stories that will challenge what you think you know about family, forgiveness, and the courage to choose love over convention.